Arsonists, committing the act of arson, setting fire to houses and property. People who destroy homes and ruin families. Why would you even do that? You scumbag. Anyways, grab a blanket, turn off your lights, for 3 true scary stories that has to deal with a fire.
The fire. Last November, my grandfather, my mom's father, passed away. Throughout the course of my life, he'd always been my favorite person, a best friend, and a source of guidance through my wayward teenage years. Emotionally, I was drained. My dad's family, with whom my relationship was strained at best, had never bothered to contact me or comfort me. I was angry. I'd never been particularly fond of them, nor they had of me, but this was too much. I posted a Facebook status telling them I didn't want to be part of the family anymore, that they had crossed the line not to bother speaking to me or sending me birthday cards again. I knew the post would be controversial. The first response came in message form from a girl I've gone to high school with and only vaguely knew. She told me she was proud for me for standing up to my family, and that she'd gone through something similar with hers. We agreed to meet up for drinks that week. We went to the local concert venue for some drinks and really hit it off. As the alcohol started to take effect, we got even closer. Eventually, we met up once a week to get drinks. She'd crash at my house often, due to some problems with her family. We became best friends and emotional support for each other as we dealt with 20-something girl problems. Months down the road, she was supposed to move in with a friend of her ex's, but not wanting to have to deal with his occasional visits and with potentially keeping tabs on her, we decided to get a place of our own. My grandpa's death had left me with a small inheritance. I bought an old trailer to restore and move into with my best friend. We spent weeks painting and trying to restore the trailer. I decorated it with all the cute kitsy vintage stuff I'd acquired over the years. We were told once that it looked dollhouse perfect. We both met guys at the same time and fell hard for them. We'd always joke about how we were perfect best friends because our taste in men were so vastly different, to the point at which she'd see guys she thought were particularly ugly and knew they were perfect for me. Her boyfriend was an ex-Marine. He was large, quiet, and frankly kinda strange. My dude gave me some furniture from his old house, and as we were moving in it, the ex-Marine sat at our kitchen table, wearing a towel and nothing else, his dog stalking around our feet, seeking an ear scratch. In my bedroom, I confessed to my dude that this guy did this frequently, making himself so much at home in my trailer that my roommate would have to remind him to put a towel on to walk into my kitchen. The dog was over all the time, meaning I could never bring my mom's dog to visit. I was uncomfortable with the situation, but never enough to do anything more than joke about it with my roommate. There were other things she did that were the cause for problems, like stealing my clothes out of my closet and never putting them back, smoking cigarettes in the kitchen instead of outside, and binging all the groceries that should have lasted us for weeks. I bitched about it to my dude to vent, but never said anything to her. Even though we had our respective Prince Charmings, we were still very close. Throughout the beginning of this very hot summer, we'd sun ourselves and smoke cigarettes, or lie around the living room on our respective computers in our underwear, taunting our boyfriends. Then, my roommate started to change. She cut her hair so that she'd have bangs and dyed it black, very much like my own hair. Bruises peppered her limbs, large, impossible to miss blemishes, she said, coming from the awesome rough sex she'd have with the Marine. She'd be quiet and moody, and her visits became more and more infrequent. She'd tell me about the dreams she was having, once telling me, "I dreamed I buried a woman to her neck in sand and drowned her in the tide. The ex-Marine took her fishing, and she confessed she loved the feeling of killing something small and helpless. She posted pictures of the turtle she'd killed for soup on Facebook. It was around the end of the month, when rent was due, when she disappeared completely. My parents and I both tried to ask her what was going on and where the rent money was, but she did not reply. A week later, she told me she was going to rehab for her drinking problem and for things to do with her eating disorder, that she'd broken up with the Marine, but a very recent Facebook check-in at a bar with him told me otherwise. I felt betrayed that she'd lied to me. One of my friends, who was thinking about moving into the now empty room, came over to help me put her stuff in bags. She suggested that since I was forced to pay the extra half of rent, an almost impossible task for the minimum wage job I had, and because we found more and more of my missing clothes in ex-roommate's room, that I keep some of hers. So I did. I felt guilty, but figured that when she came to pick up the rest of her stuff, we could talk about it. Unfortunately, I came home one day to find the back door pried open and all of her stuff gone. I was furious about the damage to the door and that she would not even face me. 2 weeks later, I had mostly moved on. I was angry about losing my best friend, but I still had my dude. One night, I arrived home from work. On the phone with him. He was asking me to come over, but I kinda wanted to stay home, smoke weed, and work on some art I wanted to finish. But I half begrudgingly agreed to head over to his place for the night. When he went to work the next morning around 7:30, he told me it would be okay if I wanted to sleep in and stay at his place for a while, but I longed for my own bed. I got into the car and headed home. The first thing I noticed when I unlocked the door was a smell. Gas. Did I leave the stove on? No, I had no food. I walked over to it. The walls and ceilings were black with fire damage. A pile of something was still smoking on the stovetop. Magazines, I realized, and scrapes of my clothing. 2 of the 4 burners were turned all the way up. I turned them off. I scrambled to my bedroom first. My MacBook Pro had been smashed with a hammer, a direct message to me that this was not a burglary. My $1,500 DSLR camera and set of lenses, as well as my Kindle, were gone. Some of the stuff I kept of hers were piled by the door, with my most expensive Xbox games. Her boyfriend had an Xbox, and all of the smoke detectors had been ripped down. Most of my clothes had been stolen. A bag of his dog food I tucked into a cabinet was pulled out and sitting on the counter. I felt sick. My vision blurred. The first thing my panicky brain had me do was call my father, who of course told me to call the police before coming over immediately. The fire department brought 2 fire trucks, extinguished the remaining flames, and dragged the stove out of the trailer. A cop took the report. Eventually, everyone left. I threw as much of my things I'd needed as I could into a suitcase, and unable to stay in the ruins of my home any longer, I went to my mother's house. The police took my computer and my point-and-shoot camera as evidence. From what I hear, this means I'll never see them again. The damage to the trailer was too extensive, about $25,000, and the insurance company declared it a total loss. It has been scrapped. They covered the damage to the trailer, but because my mom had paid it as a gift to me, refused to pay for my stuff. Everything I had has been lost. I got a new laptop for my birthday, and I'm very thankful, but it's not a MacBook Pro. And all my precious photography and music files are in evidence lockup. I was in a car accident soon after. I'm trying to find a new place to live. Both the nearby universities right now, it's almost impossible. Everything of any sort of value that I owned and have worked for since I was 16 years old is gone. I'm angry every day. I haven't heard from the ex-roommate or her boyfriend or the cops for that matter. Living in our crawl space, unbeknownst to us. I grew up on an island in Alaska, and I lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house is 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and recreational room. One of the walls had plywood pieces up, so we could feed extension cords through it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you would enter from one side and then park in the carport, and then just drive forward to exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks because we caught our own rainwater. We also used this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift a cover up to get into the water tanks. You could only enter the crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2 by 2 door that we kept a master lock on, but never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster's area was on this side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch which was half covered, and he had a doghouse. Brewster was a lab mix who weighed 130 pounds. He was a fantastic dog who only barked when necessary. During the summers, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give them a quick bark to get them on their way. We knew his barks. There were 4 of us in my family, my parents, myself, and my older brother, who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room, but just once in a while throughout the day, because they had a smaller disability and were able to keep up in some of their general classes. But some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illnesses. My brother was loved by the kids in school, and everyone knew him. One day, a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis has moderate Downs and he didn't really like playing with other kids. He liked watching kids play. Travis likes watching movies and listening to music. My mom asked the kid what his name was, and he said his name was Mark, and he knew Travis from junior high the year prior because he would go into Travis's class sometimes to help him with his homework. I remember him staring at me a little too much, and he didn't seem like anyone who was mentally challenged. My mom let him come in, but kept a watchful eye on them. Travis didn't really seem like he wanted him there, and my mom told Mark we were having dinner soon, and told him it was time for him to go. My mom found out he had moved into the area where we lived, but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts. I think he came over another time, and my mom felt bad for him, but she felt something was off. She felt like he was coming over because of me. My mom politely told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors, and he seemed okay with that and never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone for a couple hours. I would stay home with Travis. At the time, I was 11 and he was 13. I started helping out in the church nursery when I was 9, and when I turned 11, my best friends and I took a babysitting course which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together, and at age 12, started babysitting on our own. My mom was a homemaker and was always home except for Wednesday church service. My parents didn't drink, do drugs, or smoke. I can only remember my parents going out a few times where we needed a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs door unlocked for my parents when they were only going to be gone for a couple hours. I was expecting them home in half an hour and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open, and I thought I must have not heard the car pull up and Travis was up past his bedtime. So I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and get into bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs, and I call out, "Mom! Dad!" And I hear the footsteps stop, and I'm looking down the stairs and I can see men's work boots and jeans. This isn't my parents. The way the stairs were set up, you could only see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I'm scared to death, and I run to Travis, who is going down the hall, and I grab him and drag him to my parents' bedroom, because it is the only room that locks, has a phone and rifles. Down kids are very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed. I'm trying to keep him in the room while I'm grabbing a gun and trying to call my neighbor. I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately, and I whisper, "Someone is in my house, I'm scared." She told me to come out onto the front porch and she'd be there. I get the courage and run to the door and get outside. Thankfully, she is in our driveway and she has her hound dog with her. She lets me know that she is going to enter the house through the downstairs. She disappears from sight, but comes back quickly and tells me that the door is locked. So she makes her way up the stairs. She gets to the top when we hear the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel as the intruder is running off. She lets go of her dog's leash, and the dog chased a person into the woods. The dog comes back 10 minutes later, and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed it was a neighbor boy screwing with me. We lived in a safe place where you just had to worry about bears and the occasional wolf. A few weeks after this incident, our dog would bark 15 minutes after we went to bed every night. We would look out the windows and never saw anything. We figured it was just bears because it was springtime, and Brewster was probably just getting used to them again. A couple months, the barking still happened. I had my best friend stay the night, and we would stay in the downstairs so we could be louder and stay up as late as we'd like. Kate has a brother that was 7 years older, and we asked if he'd bring us some booze. I know we were young, but that was the normal thing for our town. Kids started drinking, smoking, and having sex in middle school because of the boredom, I think. We got 13 feet of rain a year, so we would be inside a lot. It was a little after midnight, and her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs braiding each other's hair, and we got a feeling like someone was looking at us. And we looked over, and a guy was staring into the window. We ran up the stairs in a panic. We thought maybe it was her brother, but he wouldn't have came to the window and spy on us, and the face seemed to be dark. Too dark to be his. But we had the lights on in the downstairs, and there were no lights by the window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't wake my parents up just in case it was her brother. We waited 30 minutes and went back down to grab our stuff, and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day, we talked to her brother, and it wasn't him. That night, Brewster was back to barking again. 2 more months go by, and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster bark. And I look out my window, and as usual, I didn't see anything. I just dozed back off, and I woke up to Brewster barking frantically. I look out my window, and I see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to get to the road behind us. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to go straight through to another road instead of using the main roads. I had never seen someone come out of the other part of the driveway because the trail was on the south side of the house, along with a crawl space in Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep, and I was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by, and I smell smoke. I go to the hallway, and the smell is a lot stronger, and it's starting to get hazy in Travis's room, which is directly across from mine. I scream, "Fire! Fire! Wake up!" My parents are up, and Travis doesn't want to get out of bed. But thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside, and flames were pouring out of the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure, and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were there rather quickly, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space, and my parents in Travis's room because they were directly over the crawl space. The firemen got the fire out thankfully, and nobody was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights of my life, though. I will always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he had talked to my parents, and he said, "Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked at him with tears streaming down my face, and I say in anger, "Who is Arson?" Everyone started laughing so hard, and I'm thinking, how is this funny? That damn Arson could have killed my family. So he explained what arson was. I am still friends with the old fire chief's son, and I share that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived out south, but before the village. We had firemen for out south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island and city cops in the city limits. My mom took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials, and a state trooper showed up later. After the investigation, my family, neighbors, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. We know he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mom said the first odd thing she noticed that night was the smell of sulfur. We also know who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the firemen who first showed up at our house and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mom had told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house near the crawl space area. My dad found where he hung out when he wasn't in the crawl space. There were a bunch of cigarette butts, cans of soda, which were also found in the crawl space. But because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was supposed to be locked. So, my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything. By pursuing this, we could have not had a home, a house my father had built. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. What bothers me the most is knowing he had seen me and my friends undress numerous times while changing in the recreational room during tons of sleepovers, where he had set up shops right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all of our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he had seen us and heard us during our sleepovers, because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did and still do. I still have issues when it comes to being home alone. I can't sleep if I'm the only adult in the house. I keep the volume on everything very low. I'm scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door. I have night terrors to this day, and I am 34 years old now. I have been dealing with anxiety since the fire and panic attacks since I was 18. Just recently, I was diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a few houses and was put in jail. All my childhood toys were stored in the crawl space, along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. I hope this was easy to read. I've been dealing with a possible neurological condition for the past year, and I lose my train of thought easily and struggle to find words that are simple. Edit. I hope I answered some of the questions you guys had. I sat down and spoke with my parents, and they reminded me of the things I had forgotten or not known, as vice versa. I thought our house fire was pictured on the front page of the newspaper, but my parents don't recall that. My father has Parkinson's disease, and his dementia has gotten a lot worse this past year. I was only 11 years old when this happened, and I think there are more things that happened, but I have blocked them out. It's like I only have this memory, but it's so far away that I can't see it clear enough. But I am learning that with PTSD, you can block things out to protect yourself. The Arsonist in my neighborhood. I am an 18-year-old female, but when this happened, I was 13. I want to say this all began around Christmas and went on until February. I live in a small town in Massachusetts where nothing really ever happens at all. Most of the people in the town have lived here for generations, and everyone seems to know each other more or less. In my neighborhood, there was a man who lived a few houses down from mine named James. James was an older man, in his late 50s. He lived alone, and for good reason from what we understood, because the talk around town was that he was severely mentally ill. He had a tough childhood, and had seen some pretty tough things in his life. He was known to be a doomsday prep type person, with hundreds and hundreds of non-perishable food items stacked throughout his house and van, as well as gas masks and other such items. He also had an affinity for fire. He would constantly have wild bonfires going in his backyard. Whether he was burning brush or anything else, they were always huge. He would pour gasoline and other accelerants to make the flames bigger and the smoke darker. As kids, we were always told to stay away from the house at the bottom of the hill, because he was known to yell at people walking by and just stare at them blankly until they were out of sight. But I guess our parents didn't want us to be in a position where that happened to us. One night, we had a house fire in the neighborhood, directly across from James's house. The house was occupied by an older man who would have died in the fire if his next-door neighbor had not ran in and rescued him as the fire started in the garage, right under his second-floor bedroom. The house was almost a complete loss, leaving this man essentially homeless until his house was rebuilt. No one thought anything about it, because accidents happen, right? Sometimes people's homes just burn down because of an electrical shortage or another reason. That lasted until we had another fire 3 days later. This time it was the house behind where James lived, as he had a corner lot. This fire too was also set directly under the homeowner's bedroom, and if she had not smelled the smoke, the firefighters said her floor would have collapsed, and there would have been no way to save her. The most gut-wrenching thing about the whole story for me is that this woman had lost her only son, who was only 17, only a year before in a car accident. Now she had lost her home as well as her dog, who died from injuries he received in the fire. The second homeowner was adamant that she had seen James walking around her house the night before the fire, almost as if he was scoping things out and looking for a good spot to start the fire. So now our attention was beginning to turn to James. He was interviewed by the police department, but he insisted he had nothing to do with it. They also had no evidence tying him in either fire, so they had to let him go. They installed security cameras on the telephone poles around his house, so they could keep an eye on him if anything else happened. My whole neighborhood was terrified. We had a lot of young families with kids and older people around. Some went to stay with family, and everyone else kept all of their outside lights on to illuminate the streets in hopes of deterring James from wandering around as he usually did. However, one night, I was up late as it was a weekend. I went out into the kitchen to get a snack. Over the sink, there's a window that looks across the street down a path that leads to a park on the other side of my neighborhood. There's a streetlight right at the end of the path, illuminating the entrance. And who do I see standing there under the light, just staring at my house? James. Terrified, I ran into my room and hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I know I should have told my parents, but I was young and too scared to do anything but hide. Luckily, I woke up next morning and nothing had happened. So my family went about our day as normally as we could. The next morning, however, we woke up to good news. James had been arrested after he had been caught trying to light fires under trucks at a local rental facility, like a U-Haul type deal. This time there were witnesses and security footage, so there was no escaping his guilt. He was charged with attempted arson on the trucks, as well as destruction of property. He was also a suspect in the 2 house fires as well as 3 other fires at construction sites along the same road that the U-Haul was on. He is now a patient at the State Mental Hospital prison ward, and from what I hear, he will be there for an extremely long time. So, James, I sincerely hope I never see you in my neighborhood again.